Thank you all for being here, and my gratitude to Nilgiri Scape for inviting me to this August forum. So I've been tasked with giving you, sharing my experience in East Africa, especially in Kenya with the conservancies and what they do in the form of conservation over there and how it's uh, very different from what we do here. So I'm just going to shed a little bit of light on what I've seen over the last 20 years. To give you an idea, the first conservancy in Kenya happened in 2005. Olkeni was the name of the conservancy, which was established incidentally by a tour operator. So that's something that I've been hearing, that tourism and conservation do not go together. But in that case, it's been completely the reverse of that. So I'm going to give you a little perspective on what the Mara in particular is. So you're talking about 10,000 square miles of a Mara ecosystem, and only 900 square miles of that is conservancies. So you're not talking about too much of a land area in this large ecosystem being dedicated to conservancies. And remember that this is besides the national forest. The need for conservancies actually developed when the impact on the animals was very severe, and some of the people who are actually in love with wildlife realized that the national reserves are not going to be able to handle this kind of tourist inflow and the manner in which it was conducted. So that's how the conservancies came up. What it did for the community and the Maasai is incredible, in the sense that it has increased the habitat for the game, so as to speak. It has established corridors between different areas, which means no conservation in general is possible, in my opinion, without communities. Communities are the heart and soul of conservation. It is only when you're able to include and not exclude or seclude that conservation can be effective. So in this respect, the habitat of the wildlife increased. The community benefits went up for the Maasai people. And I'll explain in a bit as to how the system of revenue also works in motivating these people to be a part of this concept of a conservancy. What's a conservancy? A conservancy is like you had 650 landowners who come together and they give, say, 52,000 hectares. I'm giving one particular example of one conservancy, which is the Naibosho Conservancy. So there's 52,000 hectares, which is owned by 650 landowners who are Maasai. And they've come up with this concept of actually interconnecting the different areas with the reserve forest. And this land, they are pastoral, which is the big difference from what we have in the Nilgiris. These people are pastoral. So their principal thing is the livelihood of their cows. Their wealth is calculated in the number of cows that they have. So these conservancies allow grazing rights. So every conservancy has X number of camps which are allowed in the conservancy. And these are high-yielding camps. So with every camp, every bed, there is a revenue model which is worked out, which is paid out to the Maasai. So every landowner actually benefits. A person who has, say, 158 hectares of land, who's giving it to the conservancy, draws perhaps $500 every month, because every person who visits the conservancy pays a conservancy fee of $100 or $130 every night. So it's high-value tourism, which does not impact the thing. And what it's done is, I'll give you an example of Naibosho in terms of conservation of wildlife. When I went there first in 2012, there were 22 lions in the conservancy. Today, there are 106. So we're just talking about one conservancy, and that's the kind of growth of game. Also, animals have this ability to quickly transform their habits. So I don't know how many of you follow what happens in Africa, but you might have heard of a bunch of cheetahs. They call the Five Brothers, who are taking down zebras, who are taking down wildebeests. So they came from different conservancies. They got together. They're not siblings. They came from different conservancies. They got together and they realized that cheetahs could survive in this way. So it's very interesting as to what's happened there in Africa in terms of this. Now, the community engagement is also very important. So a lot of the Maasai people, and I've worked very closely with this particular village in Naibosho called Olesere. And a lot of these kids grow up wanting to be in the industry of tourism, which is the main thing in the Mara. So you're talking about a lot of these kids who are becoming guides, who are going to catering colleges in Nairobi and coming back to the Mara, where they continue their life, but being a part of the entire system. So it's a very interesting model there. And if you meet these people, you'll find them very, very. I think John has been with me, and he'll tell you as well that they're very engaging. So you will not see that they're not able to communicate. They speak at your level. They're amazing people, and they also carry the culture of being Maasai very proudly. So it was very interesting when I heard what Mr. Gowda had to say as to how important it is for the indigenous community to be extremely involved in what happens in their land, because like Mr. Shetty said, tenure is very important. When there is ownership, there is accountability, there is responsibility. So it cannot be that it's governed just by the government and you're expecting the people to respect it. It's very important to engage with the community, and this has been done very beautifully in Africa, and I think it would be an example which you could think about here as well. It has reduced poaching significantly. Again, going back to what Mr. Madhigowda said, that the people keep their eyes on the forest, so you know what's going on. So every day when you're in the forest, you see what's going on. If there's a particular herd of elephants and you see one elephant missing, you know that one elephant is missing. Or if there is a leopard which is seen with its cubs and you don't see a cub, then you know there's a problem. So it's very interesting as the Maasai are not afraid of the lions, and the lions don't get in front of the Maasai. They coexist. It is impossible in today's day and age to separate human beings and animals. And what is sad that I witness in our country is that we're actually trying to fence them out either way. And I think that is where there is a large scope for us to come together as a people and say, how can we live together instead of disengaging? Let's build bridges instead of walls. So coming back to the challenges, of course, resource access, the core area buffer zones, these are pastoralists. So when you come to, they're not able to graze the land, graze their cattle wherever they want now. But the interesting thing is that all these conservancies are managed by a CEO. They've got a board of directors who are the ownership. So if it is our indigenous community, the board of directors would come from the indigenous community. And there is a CEO who's brought in from outside with a knowledge of what happens, in the West, and coming together with what happens in the Maasai community. The Maasai are not allowed to sell their land. It's an unwritten deal that they cannot sell their land. So they can only sell their land to a Maasai. So that's another part of it. So it's not easy. It takes years to form a conservancy, from what I've understood. But it's something that's worked very well in the Mara, and it's something that Nilgiris perhaps could think about. Well, the path forward would be sustainable financing, improved governance, and more benefit for the community in terms of schools, water, power, roads. That's how I first got involved there in East Africa, because they were short of water. They were drinking water from a flowing river. And to provide clean water was the first goal. And that's how I got involved in the project over there. So Nilgiri context is quite different. Is this even possible? That's the question one has to ask oneself. We have a Shola grassland ecosystem, which is very different from the bush in the Maasai Mara. We are agriculturists. So we have a lot of agriculture in our areas, and we're not depending on cattle. There are socioeconomic factors. And the big socioeconomic factor, which I was hearing over the last 2 days, was that we earn from the land versus there, the land is the earning. So it's very interesting. So the conservation there is happening on a different level, in the sense that it is the land which is actually the asset, which is the value. People live on it, people live off it, but not from it. So, so the land tenure challenges still exist over there, but it's something that they work with every day. So the difference is, in Kenya, it's a practice of inclusion, and here it's a practice of exclusion or seclusion. And there's a lot of governmental interference when it comes to our indigenous communities. While there, it is the communities actually impact what is happening around them and have stayed true to what they do. So with that, I'll conclude my little discourse. Thank you very much. As long as there's the will of the community and people are wanting to do it, it cannot be just a single effort where the government says this is what you will do. It will not work. It has to be it's a model where there's a great deal of interaction between the landowners and the eventual management of the conservancy. So if you're willing to say that it's going to be a conservancy, then you're actually saying you will protect the wildlife, you will protect the native flora and fauna of the place, and then it works. For which you have to provide a revenue model for the people who own the land. So as long as there's a commitment, then it can definitely work. There's no reason why it can't, because you've got to aim at. So if you want to preserve it in the way you want to preserve it, at the risk of sounding elitist, you will have to keep tourism at a certain a luxury model, so as to speak. So it cannot be for the masses in this case. But then you preserve the wildlife, at the same time you protect the indigenous community, and through that you're able to actually reach the masses. Absolutely, because it's only been 20 years that conservancies have been in thing. The initial model was done, I think the first one by the Hunts in 1964, which was more of a ranch type of model. But the actual conservancy which was successful was Olkeni, which happened in 2005. So in 20 years, if the Mara could do it, there is no reason why we cannot do it, provided we have the political will and the will of the people. It is very interesting because originally the conservancy which borders Naibosho, the example which I gave you, is a conservancy called Olare Oruk. Now, Olare Oruk was the one which had most of the population. But the short grass, tall grass, the different animals graze at different levels. So what happened was, when the migration happened, they were able to control the grazing in such a manner that they actually opened the path. So from the reserve forest, there were more lions coming in. So 4 lions came in from the reserve, and then they bred with the existing lions. So what was originally 2 prides or 3 prides became 7 prides. So then they continue to litter. Every time I go, I see a new bunch of cubs. So yes, to answer your question, there are challenges, but what happens is it's a chicken or the egg thing, because when there is prey, the game is going to follow. So it's a prey and predator situation. So when there's enough prey, and so what happens there is that there is enough prey, and there's enough land. It's 52,000 hectares. The lions find it very convenient.